Good afternoon, Judge Soto and Lisa Capote. I'm Frances de la Guardia, CABA president, the Cuban American Bar Association's current president, and a partner in Holland and Knight. Judge Soto, I wanted to welcome you and thank you for joining Lisa and I today to have this interview. So we thought we'd start out first with some questions regarding a little bit of your background so everyone can become familiar. The first question we had was, what's your family's cultural background and what's your upbringing? And after I saw that question, I said, well, I know that your parents are Cuban immigrants. And I sort of cheated and looked a little bit at your bio and noticed that you actually grew up as a child in Iowa. So I would ask that you elaborate on that and tell us how that came about, because most Cuban immigrants did not go to Iowa. So I was interested in knowing a little bit about that.
Okay, so yes, both my parents are Cuban immigrants, and my father was part of the Bay of Pigs invasion, and when that failed, he had worked with the CIA, and they suggested that some of the members should not be in Miami because things were hot. They honored my father's undergrad because he had been a lawyer in Cuba, and they knew that he had undergrad credentials because he had taken a certificates program in Harvard. So they recognized that and let him be a teacher / professor. So they took him to Wyoming, sent him to Wyoming, and he was at Riverton, Wyoming, where there was a Indian reservation. And he was a high school teacher and then the janitor at night. And my mother and my 3 brothers and his sister lived in the basement of the high school on the Indian reservation with cots and one little coil burner. And my father said, look, I thank you for the opportunity, but this is not what I expected. And, we're from Cuba and we're in Riverton, Wyoming. It's freezing. I can't live in a basement. I don't mind cleaning. I don't mind, that was not the issue. It was just not livable. So they moved him to Virginia, and he was a professor at Longwood College. I was born, and Longwood College happened to be the last segregated county in the country for public schools. And my 3 brothers couldn't go to school. They couldn't afford private school, and there was no public school because they would not allow the blacks and the whites to go together. So they decided not to have public school. So my mother said, that's not acceptable. I'm going to move to Miami. You stay here. And my father said, I'm not leaving my wife. I'm moving back to Miami. And they sent them to Ames, Iowa. And my father was a professor in Ames for 10 years. He taught Spanish literature and grammar in Spanish. And he wrote 5 books. And he's a Renaissance man. And as you know, he was a lawyer in Cuba, then he was a professor. And so, all of that impacted me. My parents taught me to do whatever it took to pay the price, to do the sacrifices you needed to make your family get what they needed, and to adjust to what was happening, but always to participate in what the public was doing. When my parents voted, I remember at the age of 3 going to, la urna. So they wanted me to know. They became American citizens as soon as they could. They talked politics at the table. They talked religion at the table. That was something they said they would never want to not be able to talk about in public, which is funny during this time. And so we were always taught that our voice was important. Our being part of the system was important. And I think that stems from how they came to this country and what they went through, all the changes they went through. And then finally in 1975, when La Revalida, which is you could get your certificate legal program in 2 years, my father took a sabbatical from Iowa State and studied here, sold insurance, had 4 kids. My mom taught at Our Lady of Lourdes Academy for a year. And my dad was the top salesman for Continental Life Insurance in South Florida, and eventually graduated from the certificate program and was number 2 in the Florida bar scores.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. It's very inspiring, and and it shows the strength of your family and how a family unit can stay together. And I think one of the things that I was thinking, and one of the follow-up question was, how did you stay connected, not just yourself, but your family? Because I know you were younger, with your, for lack of a better word, Cuban roots in Miami, because I'm gonna suspect there weren't that many Cubans or Hispanics in Ames, Iowa. So I'm curious to know how you stayed connected.
That's funny, because there was one Spanish family in Ames. They were the Suarezes, and we were together. They had 6 kids, we were 4, and we did everything together. We made croquetas, pudding de pan. We embraced our culture. We spoke in Spanish. And my grandmother would send the bags of black beans and, a split pea soup, everything from Miami. And I remember we would learn about our culture. They never let us forget. My mom was constantly playing Guantanamera and Cuando Salí de Cuba. And, one of my saddest memories is my mom sitting in a corner crying to Cuando Salí de Cuba. Mm-hmm. And I used to not understand what that meant, but I recognized the song. And as I grew older, I realized, how hard it must have been for her to be in Iowa with 4 kids, one friend that she could speak to, even though my mom spoke English because she went to high school here. It was tough.
How did, that's interesting too, because what I was thinking was, so your father was a lawyer in Cuba, and obviously when you were born and you were raised, you knew that he was a lawyer, and I'm sure he talked about the law. So I'm curious to know how that inspired you, because I know that I always wanted to be a lawyer, but it was from watching Perry Mason. I didn't have any role models, but you had your father.
Mine was watching Perry Mason, because as far as I knew, for the longest time, my dad was a professor.
Que vieja estamos.
Yes. You say that to the kids at UM when I teach them, and they're like, who? I go to TV Land. They still play them. So my dad, I guess he talked about it, but I didn't really realize he was a lawyer. I thought of him as a professor. Even in the summers, he taught at Monterey Tech, and we all would drive to Mexico and be 3.5 months in Mexico, which helped us with our Spanish. So no, I didn't realize Papi was a lawyer.
Wow. I'm going to let Lisa jump in and ask some questions, but I think one of the questions should be, like, when you realized it, I guess he was a role model. I know he's one of your biggest role models now, but I'm just wondering when that happened. Was it later in life or recent? And then I'll let Lisa jump in after that one.
I got to say, he's always been my hero, even when just being a dad, the part of my dad's such a public figure, and was, pobrecito, now he's bedridden. It was tough to share him growing up, because he was oftentimes fighting the fight, and, at cocktails and at gatherings, and talking about the future of Cuba and Miami-Dade, because he was one of the few Cuban leaders that accepted that we were going to be here. Even though he always wanted to be back in Cuba, he wanted things to be okay here, not just in Cuba. And so he dedicated his life to English Plus and fighting English only, and making sure that the police departments were adequately representative of our community. And so, that was hard, but I always knew, he was always fighting the good fight. Even when he was fighting for his tenure at Iowa State, even when he was writing his books, Papi always wanted to be the best. And, my mom's a role model too, because she stood there, took care of 4 kids in a foreign land, we always looked decent going to Mass on Sundays, which I sometimes wonder, knowing my mom, because she's so kind and so slow, how we ever got to Mass. But she was, she's incredible. She got her master's with all of us during that time. That she married my dad at 16. So she did her GED, went to Iowa State while we were growing up, and got her master's in Mexico, in Monterrey. So both of them, I guess all of that entire generation are examples to us. And how could you not want to do 1/8 of what they have done?
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I hope that answers.
I'm gonna let Lisa take over because I know she has some questions.
I think your father's influence in reference to the police department and diversity lends itself to this question, and I'm sure we probably know the answer, but expanding on it would be helpful. Do you believe it's important to have cultural diversity on the bench? And if so, why? But more importantly, how do we achieve that, especially outside of Dade County?
Absolutely. One of the reasons I ran for judge in 1997, well, I ran September 3rd of 96, and I sat January of 97, was because there was a lack of Hispanics on the bench and a lack of women and a lack of young people on the bench. I was 32 when I got elected and 33 when I sat. And I loved my judges. I was a prosecutor, but they were all white, male, elderly gentlemen. Wonderful, but certainly did not represent the community. And I think that for those of the people that were coming in, it's hard to relate, right? Just like jury panels, we want them to be a demographic representation of what we are, because that's what I believe our law is based on, right? On making sure that everyone gets an equal shake. And that means that everyone should be represented not only in a jury panel, but on the bench. So how do you do that? I think that we have to encourage people to become part of the process, to vote, to be registered voters, to be American citizens, to not just sit back. My father and I at 16, along with SALID, the Spanish American League Against Discrimination, I was young, I kind of followed, but my father led the first large registration of Cubans that were here and Hispanics to register to vote on a Saturday at the Hialeah, and invited, I think, Willie Chirino. I'm not sure if Willie was there, but I know Miami Sound Machine was the last act, and they invited different people to come, and for free. And if you went to see the show, you could register to vote. And they registered over 1,000 people, and that was like a big deal. My election was the first time Cubans were able to get elected, Hispanics, on the ballot, with the exception of Alex Ferrer as a judge. And so, it's about grassroots. It's not just about lawyers, but it's about getting out to our communities that you can trust the judiciary, that it's important, that you should know your judges, that it's important to vote for judges, not just because they're Hispanic, but know who you're voting for to make sure the right person gets on the bench. So I think it needs to be grassroots in addition to everything else we do.
It's interesting. I have the conversation with family members up in Jersey, and it blows their mind that we vote for judges in this state. And there's such benefits and drawbacks to it on both ends, right? You could probably maximize diversification with the right governor if you're appointing, but at the same time, is that really the will of the people? And is that really a representation?
Right. I think we have the best system, a hybrid, because I was first elected and then I was appointed. And I think elections keep you honest. I think that you understand that you have to answer to the people. You have to follow the law, but you don't get robitis, hopefully. I think it's important. And I do think that, even though I think Buddy McKay and Lawton Childs and Jeb Bush did a really good job all the governors thereafter have done a really good job back then. I'm talking about when it was way back that we were still getting on. They did a good job of appointing minorities, but there's always room we can always get better. And there's plenty of people, they used to say there weren't enough good applicants. There are plenty of great applicants. So, but again, that all stems from power, the electorate power, and who's out there pushing. If the people in Tallahassee don't think you have constituents, they may not appoint you, so you have to have both.
Francis?
Yeah, that brings us to our next question, which was, what motivated you to become a judge, and what continues to motivate you, and if you saw any specific instances of discrimination, either with yourself or with other diverse judges that were running, either at the beginning when you were running or even more so now.
I think what's funny is it was more about being a woman at one point. Like I walked into an interview and I was a single mother. I was divorced and I had a 4-year-old daughter. And the first question was, who's going to take care of your daughter when you sit on the bench? And I'm like, my reaction was, how many men have you asked that question of? And the man looked at me and I said, the same person that takes care of my daughter now, I work, I have to feed myself. So I am not home taking care of my child. So I remember that vividly. I was like, wow. The Hispanic thing, I think I ran because I remember the times where my father and other lawyers who had heavy accents at the beginning of their careers, or because they were older and had come from Cuba, they would bring interpreters in for them, even though they spoke English, because their accents were so thick. And here my father, who was Harvard educated, they would demean him by bringing in an interpreter who had taught at Iowa State University, and to Americans for 10 years and written 5 books in English. So that really motivated me back then. And I do remember when I was training a judge, there was a family member coming up to in a domestic violence, and he's like, "Ándale, ándale, ándale," and I thought, I think he thinks he's being cute, but that's not really that cute. And the worst experience I had was I went to a conference of circuit judges, first circuit judge conference. This is in 2002. And I happened to be sitting at a table. Maria Korvic took me over to a table, Judge Korvic, where there was a bunch of older gentlemen. And they were talking about their farms in northern Florida. And one was saying, I got 1,000 acres, I got this acres. And one said, well, how do you take care of that many acres? And he says, well, I own a bunch of Mexicans. And I had my plate, and that's like right when we were about to sit down, and I said, Maria, I cannot sit here. And I looked at him, I said, you're a judge? And I just walked away because, I didn't know what to say without I should have said more. I regret not saying more, but I was shocked. You expect that kind of conversation somewhere else, but not from the judiciary. So that was very disheartening.
I think that's part of the issue that sometimes us in South Florida, we have a pretty diverse bench. And like you said, it can always be more diverse, but the more you go up north, the less diverse it gets, right? And we sort of encounters, like you did, those experiences. So I guess, how do you think it's changed? And do you think, because I think South Florida has changed, but how do you think it's changed up north now? And do you foresee a change coming?
I do. I see a lot more. Well, first of all, I think that Chief Justice Kennedy and this Supreme Court is very receptive to diversity, and they've done a pretty good job in training our judges. We have to have diversity training every 3 years. In the first 3 years of our becoming judges, and I think I've seen more and more Hispanics on the bench throughout the state, which I think has made a difference, and women and younger. So that has changed a lot from when I went. It's funny, we're in the conservative age. When I first started, it was a little more, I want to say, relaxed, and judges would go to conference in flip-flops and shorts. And now they go in dockers and shirts, and I'm like, wait, I want to wear jeans. It has really swung in how things are. So it has to do with, I guess, what's going on in the country. So I do believe that there's a real conscientious effort throughout the state where they're trying to get virtual interpreters throughout the state, because in some counties there are no interpreters for the immigrant workers and the pro se litigants. The federal government is trying to make sure that not only are due process issues being treated with interpreters, that because we only get money for due process in Florida. They're trying to push us with some of the money to go towards having interpreters at all types of hearings. In Miami-Dade, we are lucky that we do that for the most part. And I think in northern Florida, in the middle of the state, they're really looking at that. Orange County has Osceola, which is a huge amount of population. And I know that Chief Judge Myers is really interested in making sure that they have the interpreters in Osceola, and they're dedicating more people over there. So there is a shift and an acceptance that we are a large part. And as the years go by, I remember I was in SALAD. I was a member of the Spanish American League Against Discrimination. We used to say by 2020, we would be a large population number throughout this United States. And that seemed like so far away. And look, here we are. And it's true.
And how do you think, it's now that you mentioned SALAD, and then I'll let Lisa ask the next question. How do you think the bar associations, like the Broward County Bar Association putting on this event, or CABA, which has helped a lot of Cuban Americans and other diverse candidates, and HMBA, which is a national organization, and we keep pushing. How is that helping us get judges more diverse on the bench? Do you think that's helping? Do you think we need to do more? Obviously, there's always room to do more, but I just wondered what, because you mentioned SALAD.
I would not be a judge if it weren't for the Cuban American Bar Association and the Hispanic National Bar Association. There's no way. I mean, I am a product of that whole view and hope for the future of Hispanics on the bench. And I thank God every day that you continue to do so. And I know that in Miami, CABA is dedicated to not just putting on Hispanics, but making sure minorities are represented and making sure that they're members of the bench that are worthy of the position. And I don't think that, and I'm pretty sure the HNBA was true, you never promoted anyone that wasn't respectable and didn't deserve the job. It was trying to say, hey, all things being equal, we need to be represented, right? And so thank God for all of you, and please continue to do what you do, because we wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. So
to that end, it lends perfectly to the next question. Not everybody's path to the bench is the same, and some have to go through non-traditional routes. What was it like for your path, and what qualities do you believe that are important for our judges to have when going through the process?
Well, I kind of went in a non-traditional path because I never went through the appointment process, and that could have hurt me, and it ended up not hurting me at the Herald level when they ask you whether you've ever tried to be appointed, and I said no. My age, I was very young at the time. I was the youngest judge in Florida, so that was pretty untraditional. But by the same token, I'm very fortunate that I had been with someone like my father and with the Cuban American Bar, getting tickets at the entrance of your first gala at the Hilton in the airport, and working with the HNBA as the president of the Hispanic Law Students at the University of Miami. We helped at their conference. So I had seen and felt the importance. So I always felt very, very supported. And I think that anybody should. I think that anybody should be able to go to the HNBA, to any voluntary bar association, to CABA, and say, I need help. And there's a zillion mentors that are going to be willing to do that. I have never seen anything like it. They hug you and they never let go. And they call you out on what if you have to do something. So I think anyone trying to be a judge you got to love your community. Those judges, I think, that come in and they're very bright and they're very learned and they're very scholarly, that's all great. Anybody can read a case and figure out what the law is at the moment. But you have to love where you're working, especially if you're a state judge. You have to have discretion. You have to understand the cultures that come before you. Miami is extremely diverse. So is Broward. I mean, we have over 100 different languages spoken in Miami-Dade County. I'm sure that's true of Broward County. You have to understand the kind of different pockets of opportunity or lack of opportunity in your community to understand what you're doing, especially because when you're in county court, you're a people's judge. When you're in circuit court, you're dealing with people's lives and extreme amount of money, and you affect them. So it's important that you become involved, and don't become involved to become a judge. Become involved to understand what you're going to face when you become a judge. So, all of us get to law school. All of us are probably bright. We all have good grades. what else do you bring to the table? To me, it's demeanor, love of community, and love of service. Because you're not going to be rich being a judge. You're not going to be poor, but you're not going to be rich. You got to love what you do. So that's what I would say.
And one more question, and then we will wrap it up, unless, Francis, you have additional questions.
Good.
You mentioned mentoring. Outside of your father, that obviously was a mentor, and your mother, did you have any mentors early on in your career that helped push you to become a judge or helped you in that process?
You know, I worked for Janet Reno, and so she was obviously someone that I admired. I worked closely with Kathy Fernandez Rundle. She was the president of the Cuban American Bar when I was a law student, and I was the one that put together her inaugural ball, but she was extremely always telling me to reach for the stars and pushing me to do what I wanted. And God, I know I'm missing people. There's a million people, you know, Manny Crespo, we both ran together, but he was an older Cuban lawyer and he's passed away, but he was there for me. Margarita Quiros, who was a judge who passed away also, was incredibly giving and helpful. Judge Lederman, Cindy Lederman, encouraged me to run. And Carl and Lynn Kafka, who are good friends of mine, also encouraged me to run. But I mean, the Cuban American Bar and the Hispanic National Bar really, and I guess Salad, instilled in me the need to be part of the system and change the face of the system. So that was very important in my life.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank
Judge,
you,
I said I
Judge.
had no more questions, but then I realized that we were asked to ask something that one of your hobbies that somebody may not know about. So I guess the question is, what do you do on your time off? I think I know this answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
I'm an avid fan of all sports. I actually watched Iowa State because that's where I grew up. This Saturday we lost, and I do watch all UM football and all Miami teams. So I'm happy about the Heat. I like to read. I like to play games on my phone, but my best thing in the world is hanging out with my daughter. I love my kid. So.
Who is also a lawyer.
Who's also a lawyer, and she's 28 for a kid, but you know, she'll always be a kid to me.
I have a 28-year-old too. I still call him a kid. Thank you, Judge, so much. Thank you for sharing with us. And on behalf of Lisa and the Broward County Bar Association, we thank you for taking the time, and we look forward to Thursday.
Yes, thank you guys so much. It's been an honor, and thanks for listening to me a little while.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Bye.
Bye.